Uh, I wanted us just to continue to build on. This is a deeper dive into 1 Corinthians. And one of the things that I think we fall victim to often is chronological snobbery. And if it's not snobbery, it's just chronological ignorance. And I mean that in the nicest of terms. We just don't know what we don't know. And contextually, it often leads us to think of past generations as less sophisticated, less advanced, less all things, right, than us. And so I've wanted to share just this little 3.5-minute flyover of ancient Corinth. First century Corinth as redesigned. The rendering that I've used in this video is very similar to all of the reconstructions and models that I've seen throughout from archaeologists and historians and church theologians and etc., where they've taken all of what they know of what first century Corinth was, what they've discovered in excavations and all of those things, and this is a pretty close model, a pretty close rendering of what that might look like. And as we fly over, we sort of see the text come to life. We start to see the emphasis on the idols and the idol worship. We start to emphasize the size and the scale of what 200 believers plus or minus were up against in this city. And the one thing I'll note, and then we'll start it, is always present. Notice how always present, if you kind of look through the background of some of these scenes, you're going to see the Corinth, the hill where Aphrodite's temple, the grandest and the greatest of the temples in Corinth, stood. And it's always going to have this presence looking over the city. So see if you pick that up, and let's just enjoy this. Again, estimates about 200,000 plus or minus people, the population. You see up the top the presence of the Corinth. The temple to Aphrodite is on top of that, the primary temple. There's several, but chariot racing. For all the events that could take place for the Isthmian Games, they have the infrastructure there with the Colosseum, also the track. This was more of a theatrical, half Colosseum sort of thing. Imagine vendors' booths, sometimes the restaurants outside the temples where the food was sacrificed. Again, we always qualify. We don't know 100% certainty, but we know that there's enough research and a lot of smart people who have recreated a very close, approximation to what it would have been like in those early cities. Any surprises to you from that? And again, with Aphrodite, we know from the Acro Corinth, we talked about all of the prostitutes that served the temple. They were the priestesses. And when there's reference in historical mention of them coming down into the city for fundraising, we kind of get for the temple, yes. We kind of sense how that works. Now, some renderings also will go so far to show how the ports, just right outside the walls of Corinth, you had that 4-mile isthmus. And so you would have seen the ports and the boats sort of docked at the ports and would have had that sort of entrance into Corinth, and on the other side, sort of the other side of that port. But yeah. And so this is why Corinth, too, above many cities that were like this, but Corinth was probably the most majestic, was the Roman engineering and ingenuity and the Greek art and beauty and sophistication. And they just sort of met in Corinth. In these past, at this time under Roman rule, but the Greek oppression and the Greek rule, just all sort of, and that's why Caesar was so, he was so intent that anywhere that, they took over or they capture or seized certain cities, if they were heavily Greek influenced, maintain it. Maintain that beauty, just institute our rule and our regulations and our sense of order and just that sort of aspect to it. But they loved the Hellenism of their day to be able to sort of rule that. But Corinth is one of the most majestic examples that would have been in the first century. So anyway, so I just thought that was going deeper, right? That maybe fits in the syllabus for the class, right? Okay, so with that, just real quick, we looked at 2 chapters last week. And if we kind of broke them down to what we came up with on chapter 1 and 2, we thought, all right, so chapter 1 was the appeal for unity. Stop the divisions. There were 4 factions that was stemmed from a worldly idea of favoritism. The question to us is Christ divided? Is he portioning himself out among these factions? And the answer was no. When you do that, you are making a determination to favor wisdom of the world versus wisdom of the cross. And you can't have both. What you do is you're choosing the message or the messenger. Don't forget, the message is always greater than the messenger. And that message is that Christ was crucified. Now here's the deal, is that true wisdom, the powerful wisdom that you have and seek and should use in order to be unified, is a godly wisdom that only comes by way of the Spirit. It is spiritual wisdom. You don't obtain it in the greatest of schools and the greatest of philosophies and in debates and in the charisma and the delivery of those who give it. It only comes by way of the Spirit. And when you have that spiritual wisdom, you now have the mind of Christ. All of this together, stop the divisions. Let me keep going, Paul says. And we get into chapter 3. So as we the first 4 verses of chapter 3, and there's a Bible there if you don't have one. All right, so we're still maintaining this conversation of this original division, the factions, the favoritism, and what's the indicator that they're still in the flesh? Aside from the factions themselves, what's creating? Jealousy and strife. Earlier, he called it quarreling. That should probably be an immediate red flag for any of us, right? The moment we recognize either ourselves being a participant of, or those around us within a church congregation or among a group of believers, if there's quarreling, jealousy, strife, we might want to step away and say, wait, that's of the world, right? Where's the spiritual wisdom in this? Yeah.
When you have kids in your family, you can say use the masculine.
This is a great example, Marta. But I think this is an important thing too, because theologically, we could actually go from this just based on this verse and say, well, you know what? Well, Paul was only talking to the men. Ladies, no need to worry about being united. You know, you could sort of make a theological statement that that these things don't apply to you, right? Because if Paul's saying, men, listen, be united, then we're making a statement around who we're actually writing to here. So it is important. So here's the note that really is sort of speaks to what Marta and Ruth are both saying, is that the Greek word is plural, adelphoi. Adelphoi is translated brothers, referring to siblings in a family as the plural, but often means brothers and sisters. The word is the same in the Greek, whether it means just the male or the male and the females. And you use context, which is one of the reasons Greek and Hebrew is a difficult language for us, is because we're always using context. They knew what they were talking about, and so it was easy to say, oh, we know exactly what's going on when you say context here versus context. We don't have to be explained that. So we use context and we say, no, Paul's writing into a church. The instruction and correction he has given to the church is very plainly to the entire body of believers. The men, the women, the children. But all the ladies here. Would you seem odd if I just came up and I said something like, all right, guys, it's time to get going? Would you say, who's he talking to? Is he only talking to Bill?
No, we wouldn't get twice.
Well, guy is a male term.
But culturally, the United States use that for everybody.
It's the plural of all of us, right? Hey, guys. Yeah. Yeah, well, can I get you guys? Yeah. That's the brother throughout most of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, and when Paul writes. Now, there are specific times when he talks specifically to the males, and we just have to know that context. Anyway, so I don't know. We've been asked that, and so I think, again, it's great to just kind of understand why we might see something different. Anyway, okay. And then let's read 10 through 15. Would someone read 10 through 15? So in context of where we started this chapter and where we were in chapter 1 and chapter 2, what is he trying to get them to see about what's causing the division there? There was a replacement of sorts, that they were putting themselves sort of in a position of God, making these judgment calls on all these other pastors, evangelists, and teachers, and B, kind of forgetting the whole idea that it was based on Jesus Christ anyway. Go back to that foundation, be discerning, but don't boast in men, whether they put gold or hay or whatever it is they're building on. And so again, he's really promoting this idea because that's a world's way of doing things. And so at the end of the day, don't boast in men at all. Boast in the foundation, in Jesus Christ, because that is yours. And you are his, he is yours. And you are Christ and Christ is God's. This was a difficult chapter because he's sort of doing this long way around that's going to keep building into chapter 4. But he's still building on the idea that you guys have your foot in the world of wisdom. You've been in the schools of philosophy. You're surrounded by all of this wonderful, tribute to the great thinkers and the great minds. And you're trying to incorporate that into things that are spiritual and not worldly. And when you do, these are the sort of things that happen. And and so I can't hardly explain this to you yet because you're still thinking with worldly wisdom. In spiritual wisdom, you'll know that you'll go back to the foundation of Christ. You will be discerning of what you take in, but you will know that God will judge all men, all teachers, all evangelists, all preachers. And whether it's Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or present, you are Christ. And if you're Christ and you have the mind of Christ, then stop the divisions. It's going to always keep going back to this. All these things you're doing are dividing you. Is this just happen to be that one passage of Scripture that we can say, this doesn't apply to me? God said I don't even have to read these 3 chapters.
I wish.
Because there's nothing practical or helpful about these.
What we do.
And there's a word Paul uses when he talks about these 4 guys, or these 3 plus the ones who were self-righteous and just said they with Christ. The word he uses very intentionally here, I think, that over and over, it's not just that you prefer or you resonate with or the style sort of catches your ear. What does he say they're actually doing? Boasting. They're boasting, and what else are they doing? And this is a real important part. Look at, let's see, because I think it comes up again. Look at verse 12 of chapter 1. I follow. Yeah. So that's a significant. There's a fellowship that is taking place, and that can be highly divisive. Because fellowship indicates, what are we doing to someone if we truly follow them? Worshiping. Okay, worshiping. We're identifying that giving. We're putting them up, exalting them. The disciples were followers of Jesus, we're told. And since they were disciples, the word disciple means student learner, but even more so, the word disciple meant that you were a learner that was progressing to the point of being the same, modeling, being that imitating. So you followed someone that you wanted to become. And so it held a really high sort of meaning that was more loyal and more sort of blindly following in a way. Now, Jesus was speaking truth, and we can blindly follow Jesus in faith and that sort of thing. But when we start looking at men this way, or women this way, then we start to lose sense of where our loyalty lies. It's in the foundation, gospel, Jesus Christ. Right? Look what you're doing. This is the really key to your quarreling, your strife, your jealousy, is you're boasting in these people that you're actually following. Don't follow me, Paul says. I'm no different than you. All right? Follow Jesus Christ. And so let's move on to chapter 4, because this is where he really kind of ties up this whole first section of the outline of division. And then he really gets into the practical aspects of what he's teaching. 1 through 5. Could someone read that? So I'm telling you all the things you're doing because they're dividing you. Now let me redirect you. This is how you should think of us, of Apollos and Paul. And what is he saying? How are ways that we should think of those who teach and preach and lead? And there's a calling. There's an ordained calling, perhaps. That's
not just a lowly, ordinary person.
And what are the secret things of God, the mysteries? I love this. This is a good one, because we use this word differently too. When Paul talks about the mystery or the secret things of God, well, I'm not going to say. What is he saying? Yeah, so because we can hear secrets or mysteries and say, well, these are things that only certain people can know. And that's not what this word means. These are things that aren't known until appointed times. And that could be collectively, as he talks about the mysteries and secrets of, sort of the Old Testament. They did not know. We now understand the mysteries, and God's appointed time was not until Christ came to actually fulfill that mystery of his salvation, right? And so here he's talking about maybe individually when our eyes are opened, they've been entrusted to actually share those secrets and those mysteries in order that God would use them, that eyes are open and understood at the appointed time for us. So this isn't like secret knowledge. This isn't like, now that I have the secret, I can't really tell you. like that kind of secret. It's not so mysterious that, we don't understand what it is. It's just not been revealed yet. Again, whether collectively in the redemptive plan or individually for us to have our eyes open. So, so there is and servants. Servants of Christ. Stewards. To be found faithful. Let me just read 8 on and listen to, this is maybe the tone for which we can read this. Already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. Without us, you have become kings. And would that you did reign so that we might share the rule with you. We might be allowed in to rule with you because you know everything. You've already got it all. For I think that God has exhibited us apostles as last of all, like men sentenced to death, because we have become a spectacle to the world, to angels and to men. We are fools for Christ's sakes, but you, look at you guys. You guys are wise. You're already wise in Christ. We are weak, Apollos and Paul and Cephas and others, but you are strong. You are held in honor, but we in disrepute. To the present hour we hunger and thirst. We are poorly dressed and buffeted and homeless, and we labor, working with our own hands. When reviled, we bless. When persecuted, we endure. When slandered, we entreat. We have become and are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. Do you get that tone? Does that make sense what he's saying here? Right? He's building again on worldly wisdom. Right? So if you're not listening to what I'm telling you, if you've broken off into these factions, if you've been divided, if you're going to boast in men, then, hey, you've got it all already. You're the wise ones and we're not. It's really sort of, again, breaking down that understanding of, this is what it means to be a follower of Christ alone. United in that, one body. Wow. It might mean that we are reviled and hungry and poorly dressed and we labor and we work with our own hands. Maybe that is the godly wisdom and the spiritual wisdom. And then as Sue said, if someone else hadn't read it, 14, let's just read the rest of that chapter, 14 through 20. I pretty much can close my eyes and go back to my 8-year-old self, and I can hear that through the bedroom door. What are you doing in there? I can't believe it. Do you want me to, or do you want, in a very loving way if you're watching. And it wasn't always a very loving way, but a very corrective way, right? In all of these, I don't write to make you ashamed, but to admonish you as my children, right? And again, what do we see in this chapter? Foolish pride, unwise pride divides. Boasting in the wrong people divides. We get a glimpse of what it means to be an apostle or a follower, to imitate Paul, that it's not the wealth and the status and the wisdom of the world, but it's the spiritual wisdom of God. It's the stewardship of the gospel. Those are the things that really we should be looking to follow, and the foundation of the gospel. And with that, he sort of closes that section out of division. But it's interesting that that's the major portion of the introduction of his letter. And as they would have read it in the church, this is, a good 15, 20 minutes of how important this was to Paul, is that before you can really follow any of the corrective instruction on practice and faith and how that works together, you need to be brought back to the foundation. You need to be united. You need to return to a complete body of Christ and know who you're following. If you then look at chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, and pretty much into chapter 9, a little bit, but really, I guess 5 through most of 8 and the first of 9, now he's going to start going down this list. All right, be united in mind and judgment in these doctrinal teachings and practices and obedience. This is then how you as one body can live out your faith. How you can live in obedience to the gospel, because these are things I'm hearing and you're questioning me on. And so I want to revisit them. And as we revisited, chapter 5, I wrote to you not... Okay, let's look at this real quick, because this is one of my favorite passages. Chapter 5, verse 9. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the sexually immoral of the world, or even the greedy and swindlers or idolaters, since you would need to go out of the world. But I am writing you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother or sister, if they are guilty of sexual immorality, greed, idolatry, reviler, drunkard, swindler, not even to eat with such. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? For what have I to do with judging outsiders? One more time, because I know it got loud out there. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church?
Is he saying you judge?
I think this fits well within his theology of you can only love them because they know no better. And they were just as you before you came to know Christ. And so what I see in this passage is what we've seen for most of the 2,000 years since the cross, is that the church has a tendency to point fingers in one direction or the other. And mostly that direction has been they outside the church. Why don't they live differently? They are supposed to live like us. How can they? Condemnation is judgment on outsiders. And inside we look and go, you're not perfect. You're still going to sin. It's okay. It's okay. God still loves you because you're associated with my church. And Paul's making the statement from the very beginning, more than once he's going to say this, is wait. Change the direction of those fingers. Point that finger inside and say, hey, don't you let things go on inside the church because you know better. Outside the church, hey, you are a fallen person. You know no better. If I don't share with you in word and deed, you will never know better. Through the Lord can use in some way, but you might not know better if he was intending to use me, and I refuse. And so I think this is one of the most powerful passages in this first part of the letter, because it's the first of these 6 chapters that really ought to start disturbing us. But here, I just think we have to honor the fact that Jesus says to not be unequally yoked. We're not to go into intimate relationships. We're not to have our 5 closest associates to be unbelievers, because we become really the sort of the sum of our 5 closest associates in many ways. That becomes our influence. So that's the unequally yoked that Jesus talks about. But it sure is, we sure have many opportunities not to be unequally yoked and still be very closely and compassionately aligned with unbelievers in a way that is helpful in demonstrating the gospel and not judging, not condemning. We certainly can condemn behaviors and yet still not condemn the person. And for too long, as Paul is saying, look, you're just still, in some way, you're condemning. When I told you not to associate with sexually immoral people, I had no idea that you would think that meant people who still didn't know Jesus. Of course you're going to associate with people who don't know Jesus. And of course, they're still going to be sexually immoral. They can't help it. Come on, people. I meant not within yourselves. If you've come to Jesus and you're still willfully in sin, you see no issue with behavior that is worse than pagan behavior, you need to get that person out of your midst. Get them out. Willful, knowing disobedience is an indication that Jesus is not Lord of your life.
How many churches do you put in?
So yes, I would. That's a great point, Sue. So yes, does it the burden of making this happen fall on the majority of the believers in the church? No, I think this is also speaking into leadership. It could be small group leaders within a small group. It could be whatever it might be. That's a great question. That question came up in most all the small groups as far as like, does this really happen? Discipline, church discipline. And here's what I would tell you. And 9 times out of 10, the reason for the willful, knowing disobedience of a member. I think there's also a difference between someone who's a new believer, someone attending who's not a believer, that's just not strong in that just doesn't understand and is not a member. Within members, it's 9 times out of 10 relative to adultery. There's a willful, knowing sin of adultery that is occurring, and those members are then approached in the hopes of reconciliation and forgiveness and restoration. And yet, 9 times out of 10, if it's already willful, then what we see is that individual says, well, I'm done here. If you're saying that I can't still be a member, or you're saying that I can't serve, and that you're coming to me and saying there's some discipline involved, even though I know you just don't know what I'm living with because, she's better for me than my wife. Well, wait, chapter 5 of 1 Corinthians. Because sexual immorality, this is, at least contemporary, we tend to associate that with one sexual sin in the modern church. Generally, that has to do with they're in a same-sex relationship. Paul doesn't say same-sex relationship. He just says sexual immorality. That could be any number of things. That's the whole bucket of sexual sins. And so, generally, there's this, unfortunately, there is sort of this self-selection of removing oneself from the church when approached for discipline of that sin specifically. That's a great message. We're going to wrap up here. Lawsuits against believers. I love the message there is, hey, you guys are going to be judging with Christ, the end of the world. There's something that mysterious about that we don't quite understand. He's going to have you, you're going to judge angels. You're going to be above them. If that's your end game, you mean you can't come to an agreement on these silly things in the church today? And you can't come together. You have to go to the pagan courts with worldly wisdom to make decisions among 2 spiritually minded people? There's something wrong there. Don't do it. Don't do it. Chapter 7, principles for marriage, where he's lifting up on one pillar singleness, and he's lifting up on the other pillar being married. You notice he doesn't lift up in between, meaning burning with passion but not getting married. So there's great value. I wish you all could be single like me. That's what Paul says, because look at all the time you got. I can focus on the Lord. That's a high honor to serve the Lord as a single. Not everybody can. You burn with passion. You have romantic, intimate feelings. Then get married to that person. Don't let it hang in the middle. So that's chapter 7, high value. 8, the food offered to idols was last week. Just be aware of of other believers who are less mature than you. If they have a preference that they don't want alcohol around at your table, then if you drink, then don't get alcohol. Lay that down. If they have a preference that they're going to drink, but you don't drink, you don't have to start drinking, but you don't have to make it a big deal about it at the table in front of them. I can't believe you do that. That's my conviction and conscience, but I'm not going to place that on you, especially as a lesser mature believer. I don't want to do damage, because Paul says at the end of that chapter, when you do damage, you actually destroy that person in many ways. And when you destroy and sin against that person, Paul says at the end of that chapter, you sin against Christ. Whoa! So let the convictions and the conscience of a lesser believer drive your attitudes and thoughts and words toward that person in non-essential matters, and lay down your convictions and consciences in that moment where it might actually be a stumbling block for that person. That's a really applicable. That I always said on that chapter. Oh yeah, Virginia. Thank you for helping me learn and go deeper in 1 Corinthians. Let me pray for us, and then have a good day. And our Heavenly Father, we again are we just marvel.